This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This is Sarah, and I just want to take a moment to speak to you about this week's sponsor, Favor. Favor, Inc. is a statewide family-led nonprofit 501c3 organization that is committed to empowering families as advocates and partners in improving educational and health outcomes for our children. Favor is the Connecticut state organization of the Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. Favor offers a single place for families with children who have medical, mental, emotional, and behavioral health challenges to find information, assistance, and training. To find out more about Favor, please go to favor-ct.org. We are grateful for our opportunity to work with Favor as a sponsor, and now on to the rest of the episode.
This episode is brought to you by CogniView. CogniView provides cognitive assessment tools to a broad range of healthcare providers for the early detection of cognitive impairment. Early detection allows patients to address modifiable risk factors sooner, potentially changing the course of cognitive decline. It also allows healthcare providers to develop a plan with the patient and caregiver so the patient can live their best life during their journey. For more information, go to www.cognivue.com. That's www.cognivue.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Chronicles. My name is Sarah, and today I have the pleasure of introducing you to Andrew Davie. Andrew is a brain aneurysm survivor. He's a family caregiver for his mom with ALS. He's an author. He's the co-host of Happy Hour with Heather and guest. And he also started a clinical mental health counseling program to help others recover from brain injuries. Hello, Andrew. How are you today?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. That's quite an introduction. You do a lot of things. Would you like to further introduce yourself to my audience?
I have, I went to Tulane University for college. I graduated in 2000, and over the next 10 years or so, worked various jobs while I tried to become an author in theater, finance. So it's pretty varied. And then I became a teacher. I went back to school in 2010 and got an MFA in creative writing. While I was at school, I was able to teach some undergraduate classes, and then I became a teacher for the next decade or so until I had my brain aneurysm. And during that time, I sort of reevaluated how I would want to spend my time, and teaching wasn't really something that was providing motivation anymore. So I was able to figure out to get a clinical mental health counseling degree to try and help other people go through what I went through. So I guess the only unifying theme of the last 20 years or so has just been kind of going where the wind takes me in whatever direction. And now it's put me back. I'm living with my parents again to take care of my mom. So fortunately, I'm still able to take class virtually and do my internship virtually. But that's probably the best lesson I've learned, is to sort of be open and aware of opportunities that may not look like opportunities, and then take them when you can.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that that's really great advice and a really interesting introduction and relatable for so many family caregivers, because we all start out on a path thinking that this is going to be what we do. And then something happens and it changes our direction. And in the case of the family caregiver, it's usually something happens to someone else. And and we have to step up and we have to be the person to care for them. And it changes our path. But something happened to you first. You had an aneurysm, and that completely changed the course of your life. Do you want to share that story with us?
It was the summer. It was June of 2018. I had turned 40 years old the week before, and I had not renewed my teaching contract at the high school I was teaching English. I was hoping to pursue a PhD in creative writing. Basically, I was on summer vacation, and I was really looking forward to that. Uh, and the morning of my injury, I was at the airport in Washington, D.C., at Ronald Reagan Airport. I was actually going to take a plane ride to visit my folks. My brother and his family were already visiting, so it was going to be like a family vacation. And fortunately for me, I had the aneurysm when I was on the jetway. So as I was about to board the plane, I fell. And because it was at the airport, first responders could get to me right away. And then they took me to the hospital. And they threw some what are now pretty funny phone calls where the neurosurgeon's assistant found my cell phone and saw a bunch of missed calls from my brother. So he called him back and let him know what had happened. So the family flew up to be with me. I was in intensive care for about 3 weeks that I don't have a memory of, but I've seen some videos of me like feeding myself for the first time. Yeah, and then I got out of the hospital and moved back home into my apartment. My mother actually stayed with me for about a week and a half, took me to outpatient therapy appointments, and then we both moved back in to my parents' house because it was easier for me to recover with them. It's a much bigger place than my apartment. And then I went back home thinking that I was going to simply revisit my old, fall back into my old life. I used to think of the analogy like I was putting on an old jacket that still fit perfectly. And I would just pick up right where I left off. I was able to get a substitute teaching position at my old school. But while I was there, I realized that I was probably still too early in the recovery to be 100%. So I felt really overwhelmed. The students that I worked with all had ADHD and learning differences, so they really needed someone at the top of their game. Um, so I thought perhaps I could get a job as a tutor instead, because I still had my teaching experience. So I was able to get a job at a teaching center or a tutoring center that was going to begin in April of 2020. So when COVID hit, the job was canceled. And I actually ended up moving back in with my parents for about a year because there was nothing to do in my apartment. And that turned out to be a silver lining in a way because I could continue to recover while still being in my parents' care. And I was able to realize that I needed to change my trajectory, that teaching wasn't going to be what would be good, but I would find something new. And I realized that being a counselor would probably be the best fit. So it was interesting how it took a while to find the second chance, because obviously COVID is not anything I would have wanted to go through or have happen to the world, but it also allowed me to discover what would be a good opportunity.
I want to just it's amazing how like one moment can change our life. And if you had that aneurysm on the plane, and I kind of want to go back to that,
Sure, sure.
would you be talking to me today if you had that aneurysm on the plane?
No, if I mean I have thought about this a bunch just because it's pretty phenomenal. If I'd still been on the train going to the airport, if I'd been in the bathroom, if I'd been at home, I would not be here. The fact that it happened when it did, where it did, not only that, but the statistics, I think, 50% of people who have a ruptured brain aneurysm die immediately regardless. There's no, even if you're able to get care. So I'm really one of the very few people who have not only been able to survive, but don't have major debilitating lingering injuries. My vision is still not 100%. And if I turn my head from the side to side, I have to wait for it to settle. I'm sort of like a human bobblehead. Since it's been 5.5 years, I've adjusted to the point where now it's just common. Like I know if I'm going to go downstairs and have to make a turn before I go down the stairs, I need to wait a second for the vision to settle so that I can step in the right place. So yeah, I mean, they're for whatever reason, I'm extremely lucky that everything played out the way that it did, um, and seems to continue to do that because I was able to move back in with my parents to take care of my mother because I don't have other obligations that I couldn't break. Um, so it's been interesting how things have kind of played out almost as if they were written ahead of time.
I think that that's really interesting too, how you had to move in with your parents so they could take care of you while you recovered. Again, your recovery was miraculous. Like you said, most people don't survive. And most of the people who do, even if they would be talking to me, might not be able to walk after, or might experience paralysis. If I'm not mistaken, I might be mistaken on that.
No, I think you're so I don't really attend as many of them now, but I used to attend a lot of support groups for people with either acquired brain injuries, which is what I had, when you have an internal injury, or traumatic brain injury when it's external. So if you've been in a car accident or you've been in a fight or played football or something. And the common theme usually is that everyone's processing was affected. So I have a good friend who needs to walk with a cane, and that he'll probably have to do that for the rest of his life. But he also needed to retire and go on disability because he can really only focus for about a few hours a day. And I have friends who can't, be on their phone or a computer for prolonged periods because they need to decompress. So not only was I lucky that physically I'm still able to do most things, but also mentally I can still have the endurance to work for 24 hours or whatever's needed. Um, so there are a lot of different ways in which I'm in the top 99th percentile of um, people who've recovered. What was difficult a lot of the time was because it's such a rare thing, there's really not a lot of information. So I had to just assume that how I was feeling at the time was a typical response to the situation. Um, and it took about 3 years before I felt comfortable enough to really move forward with my life. Otherwise, there was a lot of depression. There were certain goals that I had, or like you had said, I thought my life was going to be on a specific track, and then all of a sudden it wasn't anymore. And none of the goals that I'd had previously seemed like they were either worthwhile or attainable. So I had to suddenly think, okay, well, what else can I do that will be as fulfilling? Um, Unfortunately, I was able to reach that point, but it took a lot of time and a lot of therapy. I'm still working with a somatic experience therapist who helps me process emotions, which are still somewhat difficult to experience, which is also has benefits. Essentially, my mother has what's basically a terminal diagnosis. At some point, um, she will die from ALS. But I don't get overwhelmed emotionally when I have to care for her now, even when things are particularly bad, or if I see her struggling. Um, most people wouldn't be able to handle that easily. But for me, because of the aneurysm, it sort of blunted my emotional connections. So I don't experience joy the same way, which is a drag sometimes, but I also can handle things that are emotionally difficult.
Yeah. And I think a lot of caregivers would like the ability to shut off some of the emotional, like taxingness and some of the emotional stress of caregiving. However, like you said, with that, there's the consequence of you don't get to feel joy as intensely. And caring for your mom and after going through such a traumatic experience for yourself and needing years of self-discovery and then having this additional burden, so many people would be feeling so defeated and so frustrated. And you're just very like in matter of fact, like this is what it is and this is why. And I think that is important and great, but I can also understand how it can be both a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate that I've been able to adjust and sort of accept that this is how things are, which was also really difficult to get to that point. It did take a lot of really hard work, participating in therapeutic exercises to sort of help me arrive at that point. Um, it has been it has been good in that I can help my mom without feeling overwhelmed, and I've sort of accepted the that I do experience joy. It's just not the way that it used to be, um, and it's not as apparent. So um, there is a trade off, but also I feel like this is one of the things I had been looking for in the midst of my recovery. I had always assumed, growing up that I would get married one day and start a family of my own. That was just sort of a given. Um, After the aneurysm, that didn't seem really either doable or important anymore, especially if I have difficulty making emotional connections. So once that sort of was out of the picture, then it was sort of like, well, then what's the purpose? What am I doing here? And I found the counseling program, which was something I felt, okay, well, this is something I can do. But also being able to take care of my mother then became a valuable thing that sort of took the place of, well, you might not get married anytime soon. You might not have a family of your own soon. That may not happen at all. But you can be in a position to take care of your mother and either add some time to her life or make her feel comfortable. So that once I realized that, it was sort of a big relief.
That's really beautiful in a sense of that, and I'm a firm believer in you don't have to be married or have a family to be happy. You can be happy single and find joy and find happiness and find peace and have a content life, as a single individual or as a married individual with family or married without kids, whatever your life path is, or you want, or you choose, or is chosen for you in certain circumstances, you should be able to find peace and happiness with whatever
Sure.
it is. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned like caring for your mom and how fulfilling that has been for you in place of having a spouse and things like that. Now, has your mom's journey with ALS overlapped with your recovery journey from your aneurysm?
No, so I really began to feel comfortable with everything around I so this would probably be 2021, and she broke her foot in 2021, and it was during her rehabilitation for a broken foot that she realized that her balance wasn't quite 100%. Um, so then I think the next year she was finally officially diagnosed with ALS, but it took a while. I think because she's 76, and most of the time people get diagnosed with ALS in their 40s or 50s. So I think they may have not looked for it initially, but eventually she began just showing more symptoms later on. So we just sort of missed each other in terms of overlapping our own recoveries together. By the time I finally felt comfortable is about when she began to experience the first signs of everything.
Yeah.
So
Now, how is she doing in her ALS journey? Like, is she completely bedridden yet? Or is she able to get around still?
for the well, so she can at this point not really move. Um, she can speak, but her voice is really compromised. And usually I can understand what she's saying most of the time, but most people need me to translate. She has an eye gaze machine that will track her vision to help her communicate, and we've begun using that. She can still support her own weight, so we use a pivot disc to transfer her from like chair to wheelchair. And then she's got a power wheelchair. So for the most part, she's not able, she needs 24-hour care. The movements are very minimal. She can still speak. She gets fed through a peg tube. Um, so my guess is I'm not sure what the next. She is fortunately plateaued for the last year or so. I would say, or not year, for the last 6 months. I moved in with them at the end of June of last year, so I've been here for about 6 months. So since my arrival, things have kind of plateaued. But she's at the point now where she needs 24-hour care and really can't do anything for herself anymore. Um, so every day we're sort of learning more and more about what can and can't happen. But we're fortunate that she has a lot of really good friends who are supportive, and will stay in touch with her and come visit. And we have a lot of equipment that is helpful to um, give her the quality of life that she should have. And me being here, I think, is really helpful in a lot of ways. So
Yeah.
I think she struggles. If she repeats herself 5 times and I still don't understand what she's saying, that can be really frustrating. So for the most part, she's got a really positive attitude, and I don't really see very many things bothering her day to day. Where it can be overwhelming, but for the most part, she seems to be handling things really well.
That's really good to know that she is handling things well. I know ALS is, I don't know a lot about it. I know it's Lou Gehrig's disease, and I know that it's fairly fast progressing, if I'm not mistaken. And I also know that it doesn't have a happy ending, unfortunately. I don't think anybody has ever recovered from ALS. Is that all true, or could you add any
Yeah,
more information on that?
yeah. So I know it's a neurodegenerative disorder where you basically lose control of your functions. I think the majority of people, when they pass away from it, it's because they can't breathe anymore. Um, Currently, I don't. I mean, there's not. Unfortunately, there's not a cure. And one of the doctors had suggested that most, if not all, of the drugs that they have developed, the goal is really to slow down the effects of it. That there's nothing they can do to really stop it or reverse it. Um, so yeah, you're right. It's basically just a matter of time. Um, that being said, I know that there's currently a former musician named Jason Becker. There's a great documentary about him. He is, I think, 56 and was diagnosed in his 20s. So um, he's on one end of the spectrum where he's lived for over 30 years with this disease. It can be. I think there are different varieties where it can be slower moving. Sometimes it can progress really quickly. Um, I'm not really sure of any more details than that. We were sort of given the initial diagnosis that hers would be slow moving, and it was for the first year, I would say, and then there was a very quick progression in 6 months, and now it's sort of slowed down again. So it's sort of we'll
Yeah, I know I believe I've only cared for one patient in my 17 years in long-term care with ALS. And I'll never forget the guy. He was young, he had a daughter that was about my age when I was taking care of him, and he knew his outcome was very grim. He kind of was like, every day I'm gonna lose something. He's like, I'm gonna do my best to hold on to what I have as long as I have it. He's like, and you know, he's like, unfortunately, I'm here to die. And he was very matter of fact about it. And it was it was sad, but it was also, better than living in denial and, things like that. So I applauded him for that. And how has your situation, because you fairly quickly, in the matter of months, went
Mhm.
from being, or the matter of a few short years, went from needing a lot of care to becoming a primary caregiver. How has that affected your relationship with your mom?
I don't think it's necessarily changed things so much. Um, I've always known my mother to be one of the most caring, considerate people. Um, so that and the fact that she raised me and took care of me when I was recovering. Um, that being said, I still feel like I'm doing a lot of this for me. Um, there's a certain amount of you know, fulfillment that I'm getting from this opportunity. Which I guess can sound strange because I don't know of very many people who would say, uh, aside from the fact that they're doing a good thing, um, that being a caregiver is sort of the end all be all. But I think part of it too is I really have been given a second chance. Um, the I probably should have all things, with if the odds were not in my favor that I would still be here talking with you. So from here on out, I wrote about this in a memoir that I wrote where I basically say I'm playing with house money. The rest of my life is just me gambling with winnings. So it doesn't really matter what ends up happening. It's all just a win in my book. So um, it took a little while for me to realize that maybe I wasn't going to do certain things, that I had anticipated doing in the future. Uh, and I mean, I may one day get married and have kids. I may not. I'm real much more comfortable with that now. Um, but I'm also in a position now where I can help my mother, and doing that gives me a sense of fulfillment. That so I guess our relationship hasn't really changed so much, but the situation has drastically. But it also gives me the reason that I was looking for, like what could fill that void that wasn't there, that I didn't know what would fill that, and now it's being filled.
Yeah. And I think that that's amazing. I know so many caregivers who are, put in that situation and just aren't happy about it. Nobody wants to be a family caregiver. Um, I know a lot of caregivers who can't find peace with their situation. So again, I applaud you for that. Now, as far as support goes, I know you mentioned your mom has some friends that are nearby that help out and stuff like that. And I know you mentioned that you do have a brother. Do you feel like you have a lot of support in helping your mom, or do you feel a lot of times like it's just you isolated?
No, I mean, again, I'm really fortunate. There are some really wonderful organizations that my mother belongs to. One of them is called Compassionate Care ALS. They're a nonprofit who will support her in various ways. They have equipment that she borrows from them that she uses. There's also a local South Carolina chapter of ALS. So she's supported by a lot of really wonderful people whose jobs it is to do that. We have really great caregivers or aides that come in every day to help out. So I'm never by myself usually. Um, I feel like I'm kind of the quarterback of the team where I'm ensuring that, like, okay, she's getting her medications when she needs them, she's getting fed when she needs them. I'm scheduling her doctor's appointments when she needs them. If friends reach out and want to come visit, I'm putting that on the calendar. But it's not simply just me. It is a team effort. Um, and again, in hearing from, because my mother's also in various support groups, so hearing from other people who have ALS and the lack of support they get sometimes, it really makes me think how lucky we are that she has a large group of friends who continue to see her, and that she does have these resources that some other people may not have. Um, so yeah, I mean, I rarely ever feel like it's just me. Um, there's certain things that I don't think anyone else has in terms of like the care that's being provided, but I'm also in a unique position emotion wise that it doesn't really bother me. Um, it's almost as if all of this stuff has happened to allow me to be in this position and not be affected by it, which is very interesting.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. And I am grateful to hear that you feel like you have the support that you need and that your mom has a lot of support. Like you said, there are so many family caregivers, so many people with various medical conditions that just lack support. Um, Based on, location, there not being enough services in their area, finances, um again, feeling isolated or whatever else it is. So I think that that's fantastic. I was just wanting to ask too, because you talked about how and you mentioned it before, how you keep feeling like you're exactly where you're supposed to be, like everything was planned for you. um if you don't mind me asking, I don't usually ask you about this, is there like a belief system associated with that, or not really, it's just like this was my destiny? And do you have a plan or an idea of what you want to do when your caregiver role ends?
In terms of a belief system, what helped me a lot during my recovery was there were a lot of I read a lot of philosophy and Buddhism. Both of those were really helpful in terms of keeping a perspective and looking at things in a different way. Um, and also, recognizing kind of what's in my control, what's out of my control. I wouldn't necessarily say I subscribe to anything more than that. So that I hope that answered your first question. I was raised Jewish. I went to temple on the high holidays, but I didn't really have much of a belief system. That was more of a cultural thing. And I guess when I'm done, I will hopefully graduate with my degree by the end of the year. So I'll probably try to get a resident counseling position somewhere. Um, and I don't know where that will be quite yet. I say that because I'm in South Carolina, but I live in Virginia. So I might very well just go back to Virginia and see if I can get a job there. Um, my brother lives in Michigan, so I may try to be closer to him. It's tricky. I grew up in New York City, um, and I had a driver's license, but it expired when I left New York. And if you leave the state with an expired license, you have to take all the tests again. So I haven't really wanted to do that. So I don't have a driver's license. I have a permit, which works as my ID, but So that kind of, it depends. Do I want to get a license again? Do I not want to get a license again? That may dictate where I end up, um, if I need to be in a place with public transportation. So, but at the same time, I'm also not focused on it. It took a while for me to feel comfortable thinking about life outside of just a 24-hour period. Um, Now that I'm comfortable with it, though, I tend to be so focused on the present because of my mother that I don't think about it. Um, at this point, I'm sort of not concerned because I feel like wherever I land will be fine, um, and things will work out. But so to answer the second question, I don't know where I will be or what I will be doing. Um, but I'm also it. That's my therapist had suggested that a great outlook to have while I was recovering was to be curious about be curious about what's next, and be open and curious. So that's how I'm going to sort of allow for things to play out.
I think that that's great. And I think that that's fantastic. And thank you so much for sharing that. Um, I needed to ask those questions.
Sure, yeah,
That's
of
what was
course.
burning in the back of my head during the interview.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you so much for being here. And I want to just get to my final two questions.
Sure.
My favorite question to ask my guests. What is your favorite form of self-care?
Well, my favorite form of self-care is writing, which also took some time, when I was in school and I imagined one day myself publishing something, the publishing of it would be the goal. Um, and what I've realized over time is that can be very tricky because if you don't publish something, then you feel like you're failing. Um, and it's also, once you do publish something, it's not like crossing the finish line where suddenly you're done and now you've made it to the next level. So now what I try to do is look at the process of writing as the goal, just finding time to sit down, think of the ideas, put them on the page, send them to friends to read them first. And if they get published, great. And if they don't, that's fine too. Um, but that's very relaxing for me. And these days, I don't have as much time for it. So when I do get to do it, it is really valuable. Um, that's personally my form of self-care that I enjoy. Um,
That's a
and
great one.
yeah, drinking a lot of coffee in the morning. Those two things, I would say.
It sounds like a writer's life, though, in a coffee shop or at home
It's
drinking
great. Yeah,
and
it's
writing.
I've made the most of the opportunity here that I can. Um, but that's my form of self-care.
I think that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then my last question for you, if anybody wants to reach out or wants more information on your projects, your writing, etc., where can they find you?
So I have a website. It's just Andrew-Davie. So that's DAV as in Victor, IE, .com. And that's got links to all my books, all my short stories, the show I do, the music review show I do with my friend Heather. Everything is on there. There's also a contact page if you have questions. Um, but yeah, that is it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for your time and sharing your story and your caregiver journey with us. I really appreciate it. All of your website will be linked in the show notes, and that way there my audience can get that. And I'll also link your podcast in the show notes as well. I want to thank my audience for taking time to listen to us today. If you liked this episode, please feel free to give it a like, a share, a subscribe. If you really like this episode and you want to support us, you can do so through Buy Me a Coffee. If not, we completely understand. And really, the best way to support our show is to share it with a friend or all your friends. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.